Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. Tonight, we are coming to you to talk about spiraling your math instruction with a focus on using inquiry to do that. So what I've noticed over the summer is spiraling your math has taken teachers by storm, and it is definitely something that so many teachers want to start, but there might be a little trepidation because you're not exactly sure where to begin because it sounds completely different and new to what you're used to doing. So for tonight, this is my goal for what I want to do in my classroom in September. I've dabbled in a little bit. I've definitely not jumped in with both feet. So tonight I have a special guest who's going to join me from the Raudy Teacher. Shauna Rau will join me because she has been using spiraling in her classroom now for a bit, and she has a great amount of insight into what that looks like in the classroom, and she's going to share her knowledge with us. And I have to tell you, I've been working with her all week, making the notes for the show, and I'm super excited for what it is she's going to share with us tonight. And if you stick to the end, there is a special freebie for you just for watching this broadcast, and I will give you instructions on how to get your hands on that at the end of this show. In the meantime, think about, while you're listening to all of the amazing things that Shauna is going to say, think about the ideas that it sparks in you. How can you use spiraling? What's one thing you think you can try to get started when you go back to school? So without further ado, I'm going to invite Shauna to join us, and she can tell us a little bit more about herself before we jump right into spiraling. Hi, Shauna.
Hi, Patty.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us this week. I am so excited. So, Shauna, here you are. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Shauna Rau. She is from the Raudy Teacher. She is a blogger, TPT seller, and what I like to call her a math guru. I'm so happy that she was able to join us to download all of her knowledge about spiraling for all of us today. So thanks, Shauna, very much. And is there anything else you want to add about you and
Not too much. I mean, you've added quite a bit there. But yeah, I've been a TPTer for quite a while, as well as a teacher, and I'm really excited to talk about spiraling because it's a huge passion of mine.
So let's jump in right away and let's talk about what exactly is spiraling, because there's so many different things out there that I think people are labeling as spiraling, but it's not really what I would call rich. I think of spiraling as something that's really rich, task-oriented. So what exactly is spiraling?
So spiraling is really, it's not when you're taking it day by day and looking at each strand. So, I have seen things out there where people are doing, maybe Monday they're doing number sense day, or Tuesday they're doing a measurement day. It's more about embedding all of those different curriculum strands and trying to see the connections between the curriculum expectations so that you can develop those rich tasks. And the whole idea is about continually revisiting those concepts so that students have a more solid understanding.
So if we're looking at that's what spiraling is, then let's talk about what spiraling isn't. Because I think there's a lot of misconception about what it is and what it isn't. So what isn't spiraling?
So, like I said, spiraling is more about making those deeper connections between the strands. So, have you ever heard the concept or the idea of that the front matters in the curriculum?
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important for us as teachers, especially when we're looking at math. Spiraling is not a new concept. I mean, our math curriculum hasn't been developed or even changed since 2005. And if you look on page 8, it actually states about what spiraling is. It states about how it's all about all the grades are designed to ensure that students have a solid understanding and a solid foundation by bringing in the 5 strands and trying to integrate them as much as possible. So like I said, it's not so much about having day 1 you're looking at number sense, and then day 2 you're looking at measurement, and then day 3 you're looking at geometry. you're not really going to be able to develop those, bigger ideas and be able to develop that deeper understanding if you're focusing day one. I might be looking at addition. Day two, I am looking at how measurement of length or something like that. So you really need to think about and be intentional when you are looking at how you're going to build your mathematical instruction if you're going to spiral.
So it sounds like it's a lot like using inquiry, but
It is.
now we're moving it away from the science and social studies and even in language, and we're starting to bring more of that inquiry practice into our classroom. So it's not all of these static separate components, but it's really kind of bringing all of these things together, which is definitely something I know we talk a lot about on this show, is how to use the inquiry approach. So I'm excited that I can use some of those strategies that I have been using in other subjects and bring those more in to math. And if I think about like even comparing it to literacy, like when we look at literacy, there's 4 different strands of literacy. Similar to math, we've got the 5 different strands. And the way I teach literacy, I certainly don't teach, 2 months I teach just oral language and only oral language, and then I just teach reading, and then I just teach writing. I teach all of those all day long every day. So that sounds really kind of familiar to what we're already doing. So there seems to be, because when we think about literacy, we're teaching literacy skills, which includes oral and reading and writing and even and media as well, and all of those expectations that help to build those. So if I'm thinking about literacy like that, and that's already something that I am thinking really clearly about, what is the common thread then when you're thinking about math that covers across the 4 strands or 5 strands, sorry?
Well, it starts with the achievement chart first of all, and how I was mentioning earlier about how if you're focusing day one, day two, day three, you're really only focusing on knowledge and understanding. So what you want to try to do is get to those other areas of the achievement chart: thinking, communication, and application. And the way to get that and to make sure that you're embedding all of those pieces in are to use the process expectations. So if you look in your curriculum and you look at your grade, prior to the strands, there's a list of 8 different expectations. And those are known as process expectations. They include problem solving, reasoning, improving, reflecting, selecting tools and computation strategies, connecting, representing, and communicating. And those fit so nicely when you look at them into those other pieces of the achievement chart. So when you're building what success criteria looks like in math, you really want to make sure that you incorporate those. And for me, that whole idea of application in the achievement chart, as well as connecting in the process expectations, that is what the meat and potatoes of spiraling is actually all about.
So let's get down to like really practical things. And we're also used to teaching math in these silos of different units. So first we teach, place value, then we teach linear measurement. If that's what we're used to teaching, what is the shift that we need to make to move, and what does that look like in a spiraling program?
So the problem with looking at more of your units as I'm going to do place value, and then I'm going to do a little bit of patterning, and then I'm going to do a little bit of measurement. The problem is that the expectations are end of the year expectations. So it's not that your student should get that within that 2 to 3 to 4 week time frame and then never see it again. It's the idea that by the end of grade, I'll say grade 5 because that's what I teach, but by the end of grade 5 that your students will be able to get to that point. So if you only address it within those short units, then can you really say at the end of the term that they did or didn't get it because of something that they might have done in October? So what does it look like more in a spiraling program? You really have to get your ideas away from strands and look more at big ideas. And big ideas are basically looking at kind of like a concept and how you're going to intertwine and bring in the different expectations. So for me, instead of starting off with place value, which is definitely a concept that I start out with in the beginning of the year, The way that I like to look at it is I focus on quantity and I change it to a big idea. And the big idea that I like to talk about is how muchness. So a number is how muchness of an item. And so by having how muchness of a number, I can then look at what other expectations go with that idea of how much of a number. So I'm looking at representing, ordering, and comparing decimal and whole numbers. Why am I going to introduce whole numbers in the beginning of the year and then not do decimals until the end of the year? They need to have an understanding that numbers are whole and decimal numbers are numbers. Read and print words in whole numbers, rounding decimals, reading and writing money amounts, making that real world connection of money amounts, and counting forwards by hundreds, which also brings in your patterning. Then you've got linear measurement. I love to bring the idea of having kids creating their own number lines and be able to create them with increments of centimeters so that they can then see that connection of, if you're looking at a tenth is a tenth of a decimeter is 1 centimeter. So you can make that connection between measurement relationships. Stem and leaf plots as well. That is something that in junior grades that we're always revisiting, and that's a great thing to do when you're doing quantity. So that's where I really started out with.
And I think for me, when I listen to like the light bulbs going on with the idea of connection. So I keep thinking back to things that I've done, like those rich tasks and those really open-ended problems that I've done within those contained units. And there's always those times where you've got this problem that you can see that there's other connections where you want to bring in, or there's other opportunities to bring in different strands, but you stop yourself because you're like, no, I'm teaching, let's just go with place value. I'm teaching place value. So why would I bring in a stem and leaf plot? I'm going to save that for later. So as I'm sitting here listening to you and reflecting, I'm thinking, okay, so spiraling is a lot of taking some of those same tasks, and instead of ignoring that there's other connections to other strands, embracing it and going with it, and really building those connections. That math doesn't happen in silos. That, like when I go to the grocery store, I need to understand a lot of different math, taxes and quantity, and there's, how much my budget I have. And there's so much math that I need to use. I can't just be like, okay, I'm going to the grocery store. The only thing I need to worry about is how many dollars and cents I have. There's so much more to it. And I think it's more of a real world. So that's my connection, folks. That's what I'm thinking. Okay, I can use those same tasks that I've always used, those rich tasks that we've been planning for years and years. Take those, and instead of ignoring those connections to the other strands, embracing those connections and bringing them in to kind of say, okay, math does not happen in isolation. So that's my light bulb moment for the evening after listening to kind of what you were saying. Yeah. So it's really more, you think about math, it's more of an open-ended type of approach to math and less of a rigid structure. Would you agree?
Yeah, and it's more of having that inquiry-based learning as well. You can really bring that into your mathematics. And it's great to see even where the kids go if you provide them with certain things such as provocations and giving them a picture, seeing what kind of ideas they're going to come up with just based on that. Are they going to make connections from concept to concept? Are they going to make connections from strand to strand? Are they going to make real-world connections? And then giving them that student voice and choice as well. And I think that is the piece that's really going to get them engaged and then see how math actually matters. I know I often get, but when am I ever going to need this? When am I ever going to have to do this? Right?
Like all the time.
How does this apply to real world? Well, if you make sure that you're planning those meaningful tasks and that you have a real world connection, you won't get those questions as much.
So I think about what my week looks like if I'm teaching math. So I'm sure everybody's had lots of PD on your 3-part math lesson where you got mine's on getting started and then the working on it and then your reflection and connection with students. And we've probably PD'd that a lot. So how does that fit in, and what does our week look like when we're using spiraled math? What does your week look like, since you're the one using spiraled math in your class? What does it look like?
So for me, I like to start my first 2 days out of the week. I like to do a 3-part math lesson. And I don't do 2 3-part math lessons, one on one day and one on the next day. I focus on one, and I really want to make sure that students have a really good understanding, but I also want to make sure that it's a rich task. So if I just kind of muddle through it in just one day, I might not be able to get some of the rich answers and understanding as I would by providing 2 60-minute periods. So usually the first day I'll have my minds on, get them kind of thinking and wondering, and I love using the strategy of I notice that I wonder. I'll use that with pictures, I'll use that with a partial question, I'll use that with, an article. There's lots of different ways that you can use it. You can use it, I've seen people put up like a number and they'll say, what do you notice, what do you wonder? And it could be something just as simple as that, just to really get them thinking. And then I like to give them the working on it. So more of that idea of what they're going to be doing, talking within groups, and providing some flexible groups around that as well, making sure that students have opportunities to work with a variety of students just to share their thinking. And it doesn't have to be differentiated groups at this point, really. Like you can have a student on an IEP with on the lower, maybe an MID student, but you can have them work with a gifted student even. There's so many great things that they can develop if you give them open problems to work on. And so I'll do that for the first day. The second day, I focus on the reflect and connect, because honestly, it's the most important part of the 3-part math lesson. So if you want to build student understanding, and if you want to see what your students really understand, you have to do that reflect and connect. That's where you're going to get the conversations. That's where you're going to get those aha moments. That's when you're going to be building your success criteria of what a problem solver looks like. Again, I focus a lot of my success criteria around those process expectations. And I also like to be able to give students exit cards so that I can get more of an individual mark to see where they're at.
So it's very similar to like a knowledge building circle, but with a math twist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that, we've kind of sloughed the reflect and connect, off to the side, because sometimes, when you're working through your lesson and you're realizing, oh no, I've got 5 minutes left and I'm just going to have a couple kids share and then I'm going to leave it. But, that's the most important part of the whole math lesson. That's where the learning, that's where the teaching comes in. That's where those connections can be made. So you want to make sure that you provide yourself with a lot of time for that. After those, then I focus the next 3 days on guided math. Guided math is something that I really believe you get the best bang for your buck. You can give yourself, before you start with the big idea, variety of strands that you want to embed in, give them on along a developmental continuum so that you can see where they lay. And then you can have targeted lessons to meet their needs. You provide them in groups, much like you do in guided reading, and then you target whatever those specific needs are that you identify. And usually, since I have 60 minutes, I can usually meet about 2 to 3 groups a day, depending on how long the lessons are. Sometimes you just need those extra minutes with one group. You have to be flexible. And then the rest of the students are working on centers. So I'll have students I like to kind of form it in math, MATH, and I've seen that before, and I thought it was a great acronym and a great connection for students to be able to do. Math, they have their math work. It can be textbook work. So if you want to use your textbook and you have some really great practice that you want them to do, provide that for them in their center. Application problem solving. If they've done the 3-part math lesson and they've did it within groups, you want to give them opportunities to see where their own individual problem solving skills are. So you want to give them problems that they can solve as well independently that you can have for assessment marks, as well as some feedback so you can help move them along, and have those differentiated too for your students on IEPs. Usually a technology one as well for T, and I'll have like online games. There's lots of really great ones for that, or even you can use tools like Google Forms and that you can have just quick quizzes or things like that just to get some assessments. And then hands-on manipulatives, give them a chance to kind of explore with the manipulatives. Where are they going to go, what are they going to do, and games and things like that. So that's what my week looks like.
Well, I mean, I think that seems pretty manageable. I know for myself, I played around after I went back on maternity leave. I definitely played around with math centers, and they ended up working out very similarly. I generally integrated the time with teacher into the rotation. I see that you do have it separate, and I don't think that there's a right or a wrong for that. I think it kind of just works however your class works, whether or not you integrate that into the NATH or you have that separate. And working with those math centers, I think I do agree, there definitely is a bang for your buck. And there's a great way to get to know your students super well, because you see them in guided instruction, you see them in a much smaller group. So you get to see their strengths and next steps really close. Something that I wasn't necessarily getting in a whole group independent work kind of back and forth that maybe I had before. So I definitely like the mixture of having your 3-part lesson and also having, 3 days of center rotations as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what about, I got to channel so every time I meet with my 98-year-old grandfather, he asks me, he's such a sweet man, but he asks me every time, what's with this new math? And when are kids going to just kill and drill? I'm sure everybody has had to justify this new math idea. But from what I'm getting, there's still a place for, that basic computational skills, that essential building blocks of math. So how do you integrate that into your spiraling math plan?
I totally agree with you. That dreaded new math comment drives me insane. I know I get it a lot myself. But it's the idea that, you were linking it earlier to literacy. So if you just do skill and drill, basically, if you look at on literacy aspects, then you'd be only focusing on decoding if you're doing reading. You don't just focus on decoding for your assessments. You look at decoding and you look at reading comprehension. That gives you a good balance to where they are. You have to do the same thing in math. That means you have to have a balance of the inquiry and the rich problems to the skill and drill. There's nothing wrong with skill and drill. It has a place. It should be present in our programs. It's just that it's not one or the other. It has to be a balance. And I think that, if there's one takeaway, just know that it's okay. And where I like to incorporate it is in those math centers. I can identify, if I do a really good assessment for learning, I can identify those areas that students are really struggling with in skill and drill and that they need, extra practice with. Then I'm mindful of when I plan that math work that it's to target those areas of need.
So I just got a great question from Laura, and I'm going to pop it up. And first, I'm going to say, Laura, super congratulations on getting your first contract. I still remember that. It was super exciting. Woohoo! Good for you. But I love your question, and that you're talking about how planning the 4 or 5 different math centers seems super overwhelming for you while still trying to get hold of the art of teaching and understanding the curriculum. Any tips or suggestions for making that planning piece a little bit manageable? I'm going to say, first off, stick around to the end, because that's exactly what we're giving you as a planning template. So that's super exciting. So hopefully that will at least help you get your mind set in terms of how to structure what that plan looks like. But I certainly know too that Shauna probably has a few tricks up her sleeve and how that's doesn't necessarily need to be so overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think that like I said, you really identify what it is that your students need, and then you go from there. you can look in your textbook. You've got lots of resources that are available to you. There's no reason why you can't use them to your advantage. So you don't really want your centers, they don't have to change all the time. So when you're looking at the idea of, oh no, I'm planning 4 centers, does that mean I'm planning 4 different centers every single day and that the kids are going to be doing all different ones? I wouldn't. I would focus on having those 4 centers that they're going to revisit for the next little bit, and just maybe plan 4 different math work, whether they're skill and drill sheets, whether it's textbook work that you can refer to. Pick out a couple of application problem solving pieces that you can use, and then think about that technology and hands on, just provide them with the manipulatives, and like I said, see where they go. Have them do I notice, I wonder. Very little prep involved in that, and you would probably get a lot more rich things than you would think. And then technology, there's lots of free technology, there's lots of apps that can be available. Pick 1 or 2 things that you can teach your students in the beginning of the year, and that that they can be accountable for during those times.
And I would say too, so for me, when I was planning the 4, I actually did find it to be a little bit less. I know that sounds weird because we're so used to having these centers be these like ginormous planning nightmares. But if you think about, you were planning 5 days full of like 3-part lessons where you were doing a huge 3-part lesson, 4, maybe even 5 times a week. That's a ton of planning. If we're looking at this process, you're planning 1 3-part lesson, stretching that baby out over 2 days. And then you've got 4 activities. 1, you throw some manipulatives on the floor with a problem that they can solve, and they do that for 3 days. So that's 1 plan for 3 days. Sometimes I would get a game. I would search online for different games that I could print out and they could play, that would have them practicing different skills. I would have some textbook work, or even I would often use the front page of my differentiated daily math pages as my working on it, just because it was rehearsal of that key concept that we were working on. So they would go over that. The problem was the back of the page, and they would do that kind of activity. So it ended up being a little bit less planning because I only had to plan 4 small activities that they would just cycle through. And it was, I don't know, for me, it was a lot less planning. So I hope that helps. Now, I would focus, being this your first year, know the curriculum, rely on your teaching partners. I think that's number 1. Know your curriculum. The rest will follow. There's lots of support, and join all those teacher Facebook groups because they're handy too.
Oh, for sure.
Because that's where I find it. So I know, Shauna, in your Facebook group on spiraling math, I think you are probably answering this question probably 3 times a day. I wouldn't be surprised if that is how many times you're answering that. Everyone's like, okay, totally on board with spiraling, but how do you report on it? And I think that is a big one. And the assessment and the reporting thing, I think it keeps teachers up at night and like increases their anxiety tenfold. How am I going to report on this? And even further to that, how am I going to communicate to parents what the heck is happening in my classroom? So what do you do about that?
So because I have such targeted instruction in my guided instruction, and like you mentioned earlier about how by having guided instruction, you find that you get to know your students' strengths and needs so much better. I find that too. And I find that I'm using a lot more anecdotal notes and checklists just to see, if they've met this criteria or if they've not met this criteria. And it helps me to kind of formulate and figure out, okay, this is where they're at, this is where they need to go, this is what I still need to do. So I use a lot of anecdotal notes to do just to see where their progress is at. And I also make sure that I have check-ins. So it's not that I'm just providing them with tasks and letting them go, and then I'm just going to have a lot of marking to do. I make sure that they're short tasks, an exit card, a quiz, and it's something that I can just really see where they're at in that during that time frame, and lets me know where they are at and what I need to do. And I make sure that when I'm making my tasks, when I'm making tests, again, it goes back to that achievement chart piece, and then I have to have a balance of the achievement chart. And I think the biggest question I always get is, if you have a rich task, how can you then report on each individual strand? So for me, what I like to do is I divide up the achievement chart, I divide up my test, I look at what I'm doing for, this is knowledge and understanding. This is them being able to count by tenths. This is them being able to count by hundredths. And from gathering all of that data, and I usually use like a check brick, so I don't use necessarily a rubric for everything. I'll put the success criteria, and then I just kind of check off 1, 2, 3, 4. It then gives me an overall mark, because I have so much data. I find when I read through my assessment, when I read through my anecdotal notes, I know my kids inside and out because I have given them this guided instruction. I've given them specific tasks and short tasks that I'm able to kind of assess as I'm going through. And by linking it to the achievement chart, then I can then say they can do this, they cannot do that. And then I go to my report card. I look at that overall data and able to give them a mark for each strand. And then my comments, I focus on those process expectations. I'll usually start off with the knowledge and understanding of concepts of, this is what, they're able to do this, they're able to do that, they need extra practice with that. And then I go into, how are they problem solving? How are they communicating their thinking? What kind of tools? Are they using the right tools? Could they improve on different types of strategies? And it helps me to personalize my comments a little bit more because I know what student A can do, I know what student B can do, I know what student C can do, and I can make those comments specific to them.
So I'm going to cycle back here because we're getting a few questions just about math centers. So one of them was, do you have any other technology besides Prodigy or Knowledge Hook? I would say there are a ton of free games that you can just Google search that are I think Math for Games is one. I don't actually put my students on Prodigy because I find they chase each other around the world instead of actually doing the math. It's more of a social experiment many times. I mean, if I've got early finishers, sometimes I'll let it happen, but I definitely try to keep them more focused, and I'll often link to those in my Google Classroom. So hopefully that answers that. There's definitely way more games online that you can play either on a Chromebook or iPad. And how do you choose? One of the ones for you, Shauna, is how do you choose the focus of your math centers? And do you cover multiple strands within your math centers, or do you keep it focused on, say, the main strand that you might be targeting as opposed to some of the peripheral strands? What do you focus on in those math centers?
So again, it relates to that big idea that I talked about, that I'm linking all the strands for. So if I'm looking at how muchness of a number, I am going to have multiple strands that are present in my math centers because I don't want there to just be focused on one strand. My whole purpose is to make sure that there are connections that are being made. So I might have in my math work, yes, that might be focused more on quantity, but because I also have other areas where they can explore a little bit more in my application, they're of problem solving. They're going to have problems that they're exposed to that have those various strands in them. The technology, I want them to be able to explore different things in different games. I've used Prodigy myself. I kind of find the same things, Patty. But sometimes it's even putting for technology, you can give them a picture, or you can give them a short video and just give them a chart where they can put, I notice, I wonder, and what's the math that they notice and wonder from that. Something as simple as that. You can use that same anchor chart all year long. You'll get variety of strands, but that's just, you can just use different videos all the time. And then the hands-on, I'll just, that again is going to lead to a variety of different strands, not just one. I hope that answered that.
I hope so. I think it did. I think it really kind of definitely is dependent on kind of what you're doing in terms of your main task, that there will be a natural fit.
Yeah.
I think
sorry.
That's kind of what you're looking at. It's a natural fit as to what you need to focus on, and knowing your students and being responsive to that as well.
Exactly. So whatever I might have this year may be different than what I had last year, even in the same big idea, because it all depends on the students in front of me.
And could I give an example of how you run guided math group? There's lots of questions about guided math. Maybe we might need to do a second video on guided math, Shauna. I think there's lots of questions about that.
I love guided math. I actually have made a lot of guided math products, and I sell them on my store. But what I like to do when it comes to guided math is you think of the curriculum on a continuum. So it's very important when you're looking at guided math that you're not just looking at your grade and that you get isolated in your grade, because the students that are coming in to your classroom are going to be coming in from a variety of different backgrounds and different strengths and areas of needs. And so it's important to note that our curriculum is written on a continuum. And so what I like to do, I teach grade 5, so I map and I kind of figure out where the curriculum expectations are from that big idea from grade 2 to grade 6. Yes, I know it sounds overwhelming, but that's kind of what I do for guided math. And then I come up with my assessment for learning that is developmental. So I have some grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5 kind of questions, and then I can analyze where they kind of lie from there. And then it gives me my guided math groups. And then I'll start off I have guided lessons that might target grade 3 expectations, one that target grade 4, a combination of 4 and 5, and then one for 5. And the intent is for those students that are in that grade 3 group, I might have some IEP students and they might move, they may stay in that same group. Or I might have my non-IEP students that have misconceptions that are also in that group. And the idea is once they're finished that set of lessons, then I move them on and move them on throughout.
And I want to point out too that you said you teach a straight 5, yet you're planning multiple grades because it really comes down to differentiated. And even though I have a split and am always blessed with a split, I'm doing the same thing in my room. So I'm a 4-5, but you're a 5, yet we're still doing the same where I'm pulling in expectations that range anywhere from grade 3 to grade 6, generally speaking, in all of my planning. That doesn't mean I'm planning a different question for each of those grades, but I definitely look at the curriculum on that continuum and try to pick something that's a bit more open-ended, that is multiple entry points, or I can quickly change something like, if we go back to place value, I can change a number. So I can give the same question. If I modify the main number in that question to a 3-digit number, that's grade 3. A 4-digit number, that's grade 4. 5-digit number, that's grade 5. Same question, same page. I just literally walk over to some kids with a black pen and scratch out one of the digits in their number. And eventually they get so used to doing it, they do it themselves. So I'm still only planning one thing. Just I know how I can differentiate that task so that it can hit multiple grade levels with also reducing some of that planning load that you're there too. So it's definitely possible.
Exactly. It doesn't need to be those structured, this is a grade 3, this is a grade 4, this is a grade 5 lesson. If you know the curriculum enough and you know where your students are at, you can make those quick kind of changes, even on the fly sometimes.
Absolutely. So we're nearing the end of tonight's video. So just before I show you the awesome freebie that Shauna and I have put together that hopefully will help you to wrap your head around what planning for this kind of math teaching is going to look like in your classroom. If you've got questions that you are dying for us to answer, throw them in the comments now, and we will do our best to get to them before we end this broadcast, because we definitely want to make sure that we can answer your questions. And if by chance I have missed your question, because there has been quite a few comments going through, which I absolutely love. So thank you very much. But if I've missed your question, just throw it in there again, and we'll try to make sure that we can get it. And if we can't get to all of them tonight, we can definitely pop those in to the math spiraling group and answer those, or we can come back and answer those live questions. We can answer them after the video has gone down. So I'm just going to pop our faces off for a second. Oh, Maria, thank you so much for saying this has been fabulous. I'm really happy to hear that it is helping you. I appreciate it. This is the spiraling math document that Shauna and I created. Now we've made a weekly planner. So this is something that maybe you would do Sunday night as you're thinking about how you're going to plan for your week. So then you have your evenings so that you're not worrying about your kid or your kids or anything like that. So I'm still hoping you can see it. Okay, Shauna's gone now, but I'm really hoping you can see what I'm talking about. If not, you're going to get it free when you download it. So there's that. And I'm going to see if maybe if I hit this button, you're not going to see my face as much either. So this is the planner. So Shauna's been talking a lot about the big idea and planning what it is. So that's where you would put the how muchness or some of the other big ideas that you can cover throughout your strand. Or this could even be something like a project where there's multiple strands that come into it. And you can put that in there, and you've got the provocation. Now, this is something you're going to take it down a notch, and you're going to walk through what am I going to put in front of my students that's going to get them to elicit some of the responses and some of the thinking that's going to help them connect to the big idea. This is the same type of thing that we talk about on Teaching with Inquiry Live when we're looking at wonder walls and knowledge building circles. It's the same thing, except it's math. So if you're thinking about what could you use as you use a provocation, it could be a picture, it could be a piece of regalia or a real life object that you are putting in front of students that might make them wonder and ponder and notice things that are going to hit on that big idea. It's planted. This is not, you're looking for stuff that's totally planted by you. It's a little manipulative so that you can help them make those connections to that big idea. And then we have strand 1, strand 2, strand 3. So I do like to think that I've got one kind of big strand and then I've got supporting strands. That's in my brain how I am playing it. But I think it will fluctuate and bend depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. But try to bring in multiple strands of what you can focus on so that you're not just focusing on a just place value. And specifically go through the curriculum and pull out those specific expectations that you can target. And remember, you're doing this multiple times throughout the year. You're not looking for mastery the very first time you do it. You're looking for mastery by the end of the year. So you can target certain things over and over again. You can come back and revisit those things as needed if you're students. So you're saying goodbye to those, 40% of my class failed that test. So, well, too bad for them. I guess there's the C. You can go back and revisit that over and over again. And I followed Shauna's plan here for the teaching and learning. So you've got day 1 and day 2 with your minds on, working on it, reflect and connect. And then there's always that place for those process expectations, because you definitely want to make sure that your rich tasks are meeting those process expectations. And finally, your day 3 to 5 with your math centers and which process expectations you're hitting there. And if you have guided instruction, you can put a quick note for yourself there. So there's 2 different versions that we've included. One is definitely where you've got your guided instruction as a separate activity. So if you're doing I think, Shauna, you were doing a lot of quicker guided groups where you're meeting multiple groups for a shorter number of time. I sometimes like to meet with them a little bit longer. So I often embed into here. So you got T is time with teacher, and there's a little bit more there, and both of them work. And we've actually also included too an example, an answer key, or an example of students weighing their backpacks and how that provocation, and it simply started with provocation on an article. And Shauna, I believe this is something she's actually done in her classroom where she has had students weigh their backpacks, and you read an article and links to health as well. So you're talking about linking some of those math concepts to a lot of the bigger ideas as well. So that will get you started. And one other bonus is that you can look at some of the different tasks and assignments. They're kind of the student hook. This is what I would say I use, and I think Shauna's used too, as a hook for the provocations to get them interested in what the big idea might be. So using what math can be used to describe a hexagon, designing a new tablet where you're really focusing on area and perimeter and measurement, but you're also focusing on what people want and survey and data collection. And there's so many ins and connections that you can make multi-strand with a lot of these as well. And real life. And then, of course, there's more information about Shauna and I and where you can find us. So, drum roll. How do you get your hands on this? So the key to getting this is going to be sent straight to your Facebook Messenger. So the only thing you need to do is in the comments, when the video is over, you need to tell us one thing that you learned from watching this video, one of your takeaways, maybe something you want to try or something that what can you do to spiral in your class? So you put that in the comments. And here's the caveat, you need to include the hashtag #ICanSpiral. So by putting your comment and including hashtag #ICanSpiral all together, all lowercase, automatically you should get a message from me in your Facebook Messenger inbox, and it'll just ask you, are you ready for me to send it to you? And then you will get the download right there in your messenger. So it's that easy. So if you again, tell us what you've got, what you've taken away from tonight's episode and what you want to try, and use the hashtag #ICanSpiral. So put the number sign #ICanSpiral in your comment, and that will prompt those fun little email friends of mine to make sure that they get that file in your hot little hands. So I do have, as we're finishing and as people I think are going to probably start putting in those comments and thinking about what they're doing, I have Marlena said, thank you. And I'm going to see if I can show you again, Shauna, because I don't know what's going on here. Marlena said, thank goodness I was on my journey to plan for my spiraling, and this is just fabulous. And I'm feeling so much clearer about my planning. So see, it's so good. I love being able to come on live and give people ideas. And I love that people can see the planner and are being so supportive of some of my tech issues that I'm having. One of the questions I have here is, do you divide your big ideas into term 1 and term 2 for assessment purposes? You can find Shauna mostly in her Facebook group, Spiraling for Ontario Math, and we will definitely leave a link in the comments so that you can join that amazing group. And she is so active in there. She has her entire grade 5 long range plans. She has coordinated with all of these other teachers to collaboratively work together to share long range spiraling math plans, which is amazing. So if this is just a start and you can get a lot more in that Facebook group, you can also find her on her TPT store, and she is known as the Raudy Teacher, and we can put a link to that too. She does have guided math stuff, which is amazing, in her TPT store. And I know for many of you, this is your first time joining me on the Teaching with Inquiry live show. This is a weekly show. I do go live every single Monday night at 9. We talk about everything to do with teaching and using inquiry in your classroom, including guided math and using shared math knowledge building circles, wonder wheels, how to support that, and all of the other periphery things like building independent work skills with your students. We definitely cover all of that every week on the show Mondays at 9 here. And if by any chance you have missed a show or you want to check out previous shows, you can head on over to the show page and you can find that at www.teachingwithinquiry.com. This is episode 61. So there are 60 other episodes all about inquiry that you can get access to. And you can find those all on the show page. And I am Patty, and I am the teacher blogger behind madlylearning.com. And you can find me on my website at www.madlylearning.com, as well as find my TPT store under the same name. And all of those links can be found through my site there as well. And Shauna, do you have a blog? So the Raudy Teacher, you can find her. I'm sure if you Google her, you'll find her blog too. She's definitely got that there. So I don't see any more questions. I'm really hoping that you get those I Can Spiral notifications. My notifications are dinging like crazy. So that tells me that you are probably getting those sent to you right now, which is fantastic. And I'm really sorry that you can't hear Shauna right now. I wish I knew how to fix that. But you know, technology, isn't it a great thing? We love it and then we hate it all at the same time. So thank you very much for joining me and Shauna for episode 61. And I can't wait to see you next week as we continue to talk about getting ready for back to school and what we're going to do to get our minds wrapped around switching over from summer mode to back into teaching mode. I know we don't really want to talk about it, but sometimes it's okay to get back into that mode. So that is coming to you next week on Monday, and you can stay up to date on all of those things that's happening over here. So thank you, Shauna, very much for joining me. I really appreciate all the time that you took to help me plan out this live episode. And thank you to every single one of you that has put a comment in or watched this show. I really appreciate all of the love and support that you have shown this video. And I'm really happy that it has helped you maybe to break down some of those walls and barriers that were causing you a little bit of stress and overwhelm when it came to using spiraling. So thank you very much for joining me, and we will see you again next week. Bye for now.